Former President Thabo Mbeki and former President Kgalema Motlanthe have been out on the campaign trail for the ANC. Let's have a look at what this means. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. If you're new around here, my name's Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and on this channel we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. We're on a road to 100,000 subscribers before this election, so please make sure you like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Help us get to that 100K mark by the 29th of May. Okay, so former President Mbeki and former President Motlanthe have been out on the campaign trail, and in this video, I want to take a look at what it means. So we're going to start by looking at former President Mbeki's outing. We're going to then look at former President Motlanthe, and then we're going to take a step back in part 3 and just have a look at what this means in the broader context of this campaign and where we are in the lead up to the 29th of May. So let's first start with former President Thabo Mbeki, who emerged on the campaign trail for the ANC much of last week, and have a look at what has been happening. So let's have a squiz at this clip and see what former President Mbeki has been saying on the campaign trail.
But as you can see from this, I came to Jaulani Mall to distribute this leaflet, to say, to ask the people of Soweto to vote for the ANC at the end of April, 29th, of May. As you can see, I think the response is very good.
So he's out on the campaign trail, and why is this important? Well, this is the first time in many, many years, many elections. Actually, I would say probably since his actual resignation that you've seen former President Mbeki this energetic within an ANC campaign. We know that after he resigned, he still obviously felt that he had been mistreated and was not as energetic in ANC campaigns throughout the Zuma era. We even saw in the 2016 local government election, the EFF going to visit former President Mbeki, and they went to visit him in other elections as well, and he seemed to welcome people from other political parties into his space, and he was prepared to be seen with them publicly before elections. So for President Mbeki to now be on the ANC campaign trail, I think is a great asset for the ANC. But it's also very interesting and very fascinating in many ways. One way that strikes me is that former President Mbeki and current President Cyril Ramaphosa have long been political rivals, and you can check some of my other videos where I explore that rivalry, and I'll link them down below. But it seems that these two political rivals have come to a point of convergence around the party, largely because they both share a greater enemy, as it were, or rival, as it were, in former President Zuma. And former President Zuma's decision to campaign against the ANC in this election has united both former President Mbeki and President Cyril Ramaphosa around the ANC, while, of course, it has driven many of President Zuma's supporters away from the ANC. So it's kind of this battle of what's happening with former presidents. You've got all the former presidents and all the living presidents in South Africa on the campaign trail for one reason or another. Zuma, of course, is on the campaign trail for the MK party, and this has resulted in the presidents who have been much less quiet or much more quiet in recent history coming out on the trail now. And old rivalries are being patched up in the interim while the new presidents and the new rivalries are building. Because if you think about it, in former President Mandela's book, Dare Not Linger, which was published posthumously after he died, it says that President Mandela expected Cyril Ramaphosa to become president, and he thought he would, but was ultimately convinced that former President Thabo Mbeki would, and they enjoyed the ANC support. And that rivalry around who should become president after Mandela is what is thought to have created the rift between Ramaphosa and Mbeki. However, now that rift has healed over President Zuma's decision to leave the ANC. And so we actually see them campaigning around the same cause at the same time for the first time in a very, very long time. So it's fascinating that former President Mbeki is helping President Ramaphosa in this election. Now, What's also turned out, though, is that the campaign trail has not been easy for these former presidents. And I want you to take a look, because former President Mbeki, like Motlanthe, as I'll show later, has been asked some tough questions about his previous statements, where he has intimated that the ANC is on the wrong track, that he's disappointed with the ANC's progress. And now that he's out on the campaign trail, he has had to try and square his previous criticisms of the party with his request to South Africans that they put those concerns aside and vote for the party. So his message is, on the one hand, I know that things have been done wrong, but the ANC promises to fix them in the future. Take a listen to how he's trying to frame his comments.
Mr. President, is this an indication that you have put some of your concerns about the ANC to one side for the purposes of this election campaign? And will we be seeing more of you on the campaign trail?
Definitely, yes. We'll be seeing me more on the campaign trail, but no, I have not put aside my concerns. The concerns that are expressed by the people, when the people say we're unhappy about this, about the other, about the ANC, those concerns are genuine. And we must attend to them. That's why I'm saying that part of when I say to people, vote ANC, I'm also making a commitment to the people that will attend to these problems within the ANC itself.
So you see there that on the one hand, he can't get away from the fact that he has criticized the party and that things aren't going well in many cases, or haven't gone well over the last 5 years, whether we talk about corruption, whether we talk about load shedding, whether we talk about water, whether we talk about service delivery. But on the other hand, he's campaigning for the ANC, so he has to say that there's a good reason to vote for the party. And his suggestion is that, look, it's not about what has happened in the last 5 years. It's about believing that the ANC commits and it acknowledges, it knows that things are wrong, and it's going to fix them if you give them your vote. So your vote is almost to help the ANC to fix itself. And the problem with this message for me is that, number one, we're 30 years into the project of ANC government, so promises about the future ring hollow when we have 30 years of experience, and especially 5 years of recent experience. So it doesn't sound credible to say that the ANC knows what to do when it has had the opportunity to do something for 30 years, certainly the last 5 years, and hasn't done much. The last election was already an election about renewal. And so it's hard to see how another message of renewal can follow the previous message of renewal when we don't have great evidence that the renewal happened in the first place. So I must say that the message on the campaign trail is a little difficult to swallow. Now, you can also see that as Mbeki's time on the campaign trail has unfolded, he has also noticed that people on the ground aren't feeling exactly the same as they used to when he was out on the campaign trail before. And also, the ANC campaign isn't quite as solid as it was before. So here he is in Tshwane, noticing that the campaign seems to have a number of weaknesses in his view. Take a look.
Well, from what I've seen, from what I've seen, I'm glad there's a lot of activity, a lot of campaigning by the ANC people. There are some shortcomings. You can see it very visible. I think there's not enough ANC posters in the streets. There's not enough ANC posters to communicate with the people. I think that matter the ANC needs to correct. I think also we'll say these are the successes we've made over the last 30 years. That is correct. But the real challenge is that there's somebody who lives today, who says that today I'm unemployed, today I'm hungry, today I have no water. Yes, I accept what we've done for 30 years. So I think in the ANC campaign, we've got to address these challenges that the people make and make commitments about those challenges, commitments that we are determined to fulfill. Yes. Not just to make promises. So I'm saying, Samkelo, that I'm very glad about what's happening in terms of the campaign, but there are certain weaknesses. Like I'm saying, the posters, there's not enough posters there to communicate with the population. Plus, we have to be responding. We've got to talk about 30 years and the achievements. That's correct. But at the same time, we've got to talk about the immediate problems that people are facing. The problem of crime that's raised here in Mabopane, for instance, it's an urgent problem, and so it needs an engagement. The police service, I've said, the police service We need to engage with them because I can see there's a distance between the police and the population. And in many areas, people will say that we report about a drug dealer. The problem is that the police then go and tell the drug dealer that we've pointed them out, and then we suffer the consequences. So there are many things that need like this to be corrected. Very good, the achievements of 30 years, but practically today's challenges, we must answer to those and then act on them.
So I was just in Tshwane the other day as well myself, and it is fascinating to see how few posters there are, how many other parties have more posters than the ANC, and how the general energy of the campaign isn't what it used to be. For those of you who are younger on this channel, before an election, the ANC used to absolutely paint the entire country yellow, green and black. You wouldn't be able to move. There would be billboards everywhere, posters everywhere. The media was constantly filled with these ANC messages. And this election, it's kind of like the ANC is just another party. I mean, we know they will be the biggest party after this election, but it's nothing like it used to be. And I think President Mbeki is correct to identify that this campaign is somehow not the same as what ANC national campaigns used to be. Maybe it's a resource problem, maybe it's an energy problem, and maybe the voters just aren't as energetic as they were before. But it's interesting to see that as the campaign trail has worn on, former President Mbeki has gone from a campaign message to one of actually speaking internally to his ANC comrades and saying this campaign needs to be beefed up and sped up as a matter of urgency. So we've looked at former President Mbeki. Let's look at former President Motlanthe and what he's been doing on the trail. Okay, so another massive political figure, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, has been out on the campaign trail. Now, he has also been an outspoken, if internal, critic of the ANC in recent years, and particularly towards the end of the Zuma presidency and the beginning of the Ramaphosa presidency. Motlanthe would come out with some very hard-hitting statements about the need for the ANC to self-introspect, the need for the ANC to dig itself out of the hole of corruption, and even suggesting that it would be a good thing if the ANC lost power, if that loss of power created a kind of realization of rock bottom for the ANC. And so as he's been out on the campaign trail, he's also been asked, what about those previous statements that you made about it possibly being a good thing for the ANC if they lost power? Now, I want to actually quote those statements accurately because in some ways they've been quoted unfairly, and Motlanthe has been answering things that he didn't say. He has always said that he would vote for the ANC. He never said he wouldn't vote for the ANC. But what he has said is that he thinks even though he would vote for the ANC, he doesn't think it would necessarily be a bad thing if they lost power, because that would create the need for urgent self-reflection. In a BBC Hard Talk interview in 2019, and I'm going to put this up on the screen, former President Motlanthe said the following. He said the party had become, quote, associated with corruption, and that, quote, it would be good for the ANC itself that would be losing power. And let me tell you why. Because those elements who are in it for the largesse will quit, will desert it, and only then would the possibility arise for salvaging whatever is left of it. He also said that the ANC could renew itself, but it would require, quote, lots of courage, and failing that, it has to hit rock bottom. So those are some comments that former President Motlanthe made about the ANC. And so journalists came to him and said, hey, you're on the campaign trail asking people to vote for the ANC. What about those comments that you made previously? And let's take a look at his response.
The reality is that in 2017, the ANC was in dire straits. And at that time, as a call to the leadership of the ANC, I did say that it seems as though the leadership has lost the ability to hear the cries of ordinary people. and therefore that to open its ears, perhaps it would take, shock therapy, such as losing elections. But I wasn't expressing a wish. I was merely appealing to the leadership of the ANC to be responsive and to listen to the cries of ordinary people. That's the context in 2017. That I know exactly what I said then. And when the late Eusebius asked me whether I was going to vote or not, I said, yes, I'll vote for the ANC. Yeah.
You are in a region where ANC used to lead, to govern this municipality, but now it's no longer the case. The ANC has decreased in terms of votes. How confident are you that going to province, that the ANC will redeem itself as you are campaigning for ANC in this region?
Well, I'm very confident that the ANC will restore its trust and the residents of this region will vote for the ANC. I'm very confident about that. And you, of course, the proof would be on the 29th of May. And thereafter, we don't have to speculate. The results will speak for themselves here.
Maybe the last one.
For two more questions, so don't do that.
Sorry. Zaneva Kotasha, SABC News. You say these sentiments that you expressed in 2017 are not a wish, and it was instead a wish for the ANC leadership to self-correct. Do you think that has come into fruition? Do you think that the ANC leadership has self-corrected in terms of holding its members accountable? We know that the Sports, Arts and Culture Minister is likely to face charges of money laundering, but the ANC did not act on that when the State Capture Commission actually made those allegations. You have a chairperson as well that has allegations made against him in the State Capture Commission. You have a deputy, first Deputy Secretary General as well, who has allegations leveled against her. And there have been comments about these people being on the ANC's list as we head to the 29 May polls. So that sentiment that you expressed in 2017, how do you reconcile that with the current actions of the party?
Well, as I said, the point I was making was that the ANC should open its ears and hear the cries of ordinary people. And I think the message has landed home. I'm convinced that the leadership of the ANC is now opening its ears to hear the cries of ordinary people. The allegations against some leaders in the ANC remain allegations. The ANC itself cannot deal with allegations. If it's allegations of a criminal nature, it takes the law enforcement units, the NPA, to deal with that matter. In other words, if you open a charge at the police station, that charge will only be taken forward by the institutions of the state. And the ANC has its own rule that if you are charged, if you are a member and you are charged, there's a step-aside rule that applies forthwith. And there's no exception in that regard.
Okay. Colleagues, we are on schedule for door-to-door. I'm going to take two more questions and nothing more than that. We'll take yourself.
President, you said that you are happy with how campaigns are currently going. I just wanted to know, why did you decide to join the campaigns only now? Where was the ANC late in their request of asking you to join these campaigns? And also in terms of electoral prospects, like what are your thoughts in regards to what polls are currently saying that the ANC will achieve around 40% or lower? Do you believe that the ANC will achieve above 50%?
Well, I don't, right now, I mean, you are getting the impression that I'm joining the campaign. I campaign every day for the ANC. Every day, literally. It doesn't matter whether there's 2 of you or 3 of you. I always try to persuade you to understand the centrality and importance of the ANC. Now, the polls only capture sentiment at a particular time, sentiment of voters. They are not a prediction. They don't predict anything. Polls capture the sentiment of the people at a particular time. So if the sentiment of the people is that, and of course, as we know in terms of research, the size of the sample community is very important. Because if the sample is small, then the margin of error is also bigger. But our understanding is that polls only capture sentiment of the electorate for the particular time. And it also depends on the question that's been put to them.
Thank you, President. Let's take the last question.
President Doreen Mokulu here from Scholar.Africa. I just want to find out, since 2021, we've seen challenges in terms of coalition in some of the big metros in Gauteng. Has the ANC mapped up a way in how to manage the coalitions?
Well, coalitions are a global phenomenon. And in many countries where like Belgium, Italy, Israel, and so on, Germany, parties coalesce on the basis of principles. That's the first point. Second point, on the basis of a common action plan for the term that they are going to spend together. Now, what we've observed here so far, particularly at local government level, is that the coalitions are based on transactions, basically. So you have a party with 2 seats, and it says, I'll come along with you, but what is in it for me? So you see, it's transactional. It's not about a common program of improving services to communities. And that's what the ANC is grappling with. That's why the ANC is trying to ensure that it obtains 50 plus 1%, because the experience thus far is not a pleasant experience.
So once again, you see these two former presidents in a little bit of a tricky position, because it is true that they clearly have been outspoken critics of ANC corruption, even though they have never officially distanced themselves from the party. And it seems difficult for them to, on the one hand, come out campaigning strongly for the party, but on the other hand, try to reconcile that with the serious remarks that they made against the party before. Having said that, I think having these two figures on the campaign trail for the ANC is a massive political win for the ANC. I think it's going to help the ANC get back up in the polls and probably reverse the decline that we saw in the polls, where we saw numbers that were falling even into the low 30s, early 40s at a certain period. And when we look at certain tracking polls, such as the Social Research Foundation tracking poll, which is tracking every day to the election now, you can see that there has been a boost in ANC support from the low 30s into the mid 40s now, or the 44, 43 mark. And part of that is probably due to this effect of just flooding news broadcasts with the faces of these past ANC leaders who do enjoy some credibility in the public and who were leaders at a time when the brand of the ANC was stronger, and who have lent their credibility to this campaign. However, in the process of doing so, the question is, to what extent have these leaders let their credibility be dampened by joining the ANC campaign and in some ways walking back the remarks that they made? And furthermore, if the country continues to go in the direction that it seems to be going and doesn't deliver an ANC majority on the 29th of May, that won't look very good for these former presidents, because they will have spent all this political capital, spent all this time going out campaigning, being broadcast on national TV, and it will mean that the voters didn't really bite. Maybe it changed the percentage by 1 or 2, percentage points or a few decimal places, but these leaders themselves don't have the credibility to restore the ANC to where it used to be. So it might actually dent their credibility as much as it restores the credibility of the ANC in the voters' eyes. Having said that, let's now finally just take a look at some overarching questions that emerge from these former presidents on the campaign trail. Right. So I think one thing that's worth noting, which is just to accentuate a point that I made earlier, is that we are entering a new part of our democracy and therefore a new era in ANC campaigning. In this part of the election campaign, as I mentioned before, the ANC would usually, quote, switch on its machinery, and you would really see the country being turned into ANC colors. But what they also used to be able to do is to bring out the veterans and the struggle stalwarts, and that would really pluck on your heartstrings. You'd be like, okay, just one more time, just one more time. They would literally bring out Nelson Mandela at this part of the campaign. And I remember in 2009, Zuma and Mandela appeared together on a stage, and they were just like, that was the final rallying call for the campaign. And how can you say no to Nelson Mandela? Like, then with the passing of former President Mandela, there were still massive struggle stalwarts in every election. They'd bring out their Andrew Mlangenis, they would bring out Ahmed Kathrada, they would bring out Dennis Goldberg. And it's very sad that that generation of freedom fighters has actually left this mortal coil, sadly, is departed. And so now what the ANC can do is they can bring former presidents, and yes, they bring certain amount of gravitas, but there is no struggle stalwart aspect of this campaign. Yes, there are some, but they're not the kind of veterans like Ahmed Kathrada used to be or Nelson Mandela. They're like tier 2 veterans. So the ANC over time has lost that capacity to reach into the past and bring it into the future. Yes, they can do it with the former presidents, but that's only a muted version of what they used to be able to do. And it just goes to show that the deeper we go into democracy, the less the ANC will be able to rely on these figures. By the way, former President Mbeki is in his 80s. And so is former President Zuma. So that generation itself is aging sadly. And many of them are no longer with us already. But that generation as well is on the way out, unfortunately. And so in future elections, there will be even less of an opportunity to call in the old guard to lend credibility to this campaign. The other thing to say is that it's fascinating that Motlanthe and Mbeki both went to Gauteng, which is the real battleground province of this election, or at least it's one of them. Maybe KZN is the other. But it's clear that the ANC is targeting and focusing resources on Gauteng and using the former presidents in this province of Gauteng to particularly try and regain the ground that it seems to have lost over time. And that just shows the importance of Gauteng to the ANC and how they're pulling out every possible stop to retain a majority in this province, a majority which they managed to hang on to by the slimmest of margins in the last election. So we know that Gauteng matters hugely to the ANC, and that's why they've deployed their biggest guns in Mbeki and Motlanthe to various places, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, Joburg. Soweto was a big focus of former President Thabo Mbeki. So keep locked on what happens in Gauteng and the extent to which these former presidents can move the needle for the ANC campaign. What they will have done is probably energize the ANC base. They will have energized people within the party, because seeing them on the campaign trail will bring a smile to ANC voters' faces and ANC members' faces. But the extent to which they have been able to convince undecided voters or voters who are fed up with the direction of the country remains to be seen. Tell me what you think down below. What do you make of these former presidents coming out on the campaign trail? What are your thoughts? Comment if you agree, comment if you disagree, if you want to add a different dimension to what we've been saying. Like, share, subscribe, and remember to get us to 100,000 subscribers by the 29th of May. Ayeye.